Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Archaeology in Action. I'm Tina Thomason, the Associate Director for Public Engagement at the Penn Museum. And it's my honor to introduce our speaker tonight and welcome you to our final lecture in this year's Archaeology in Action series. Tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. Joyce White. Dr. White is an adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania, founder and executive director of the Institute for Southeast Asian Archaeology, and a consulting scholar at the Penn Museum. Her scholarship has focused on human prehistory of the Middle Mekong Basin in Thailand and Laos. She has devoted her decades-long career to studying the Ban Chiang cultural tradition, including both the site and its greater regional context. As director of the Ban Chiang project at the Penn Museum and series editor of the museum's Thai archaeology monograph series, she oversees the publication of the museum's 1970s excavations at the site. 5 volumes have been published by the Penn Museum under her editorship. The most recent 4 volumes, with co-editor Dr. Elizabeth Hamilton, present a comprehensive study of ancient metallurgy from Ban Chiang and 3 additional sites in northeast Thailand. These volumes also reframe the Metal Age in Thailand in terms of global perspective. Dr. White also heads related initiatives, including archaeological fieldwork in Laos under the banner the Middle Mekong Archaeological Project, in cooperation with the Lao Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism, and and the development of digital resources for Southeast Asian archaeology. Currently available in digital resources include an online bibliography of Southeast Asian archaeology with more than 17,000 citations, and the Ban Chiang skeletal data and metallurgy data. Dr. White strives through her research program to initiate Thai and Lao archaeologists in order to foster cross-border collaboration among Mekong countries and in the investigation of the region's archaeologies. And with that, before I turn it over to Joyce, I just want to note that due to Joyce's research, there will be some human remains shown. So I think Joyce is going to warn us before we see those remains. And if you wish to turn your head away from that, you can. And with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Joyce.
Thanks, Tina. Thank you, everybody, for coming to hear this talk. When Tina invited me, I thought, what would be a good title? And I focused on the word pioneering, because I want you to think about why people become archaeologists and how they choose what to specialize in. So some archaeologists, some budding archaeologist students will take a well-worn path and work in, let's say, the Mediterranean region or the Maya. And then others prefer to work on the edges of knowledge, on the edges of studying the past. So the Penn Museum's work from the beginning of working in Thailand and Southeast Asia has been looking at the edges of knowledge in new parts of the world. Let me try it. Okay, Tina, it's not moving.
Oh, just make sure that you go back and like press in the PowerPoint slide.
Okay.
That you're not in Zoom.
Oh, here we are. Okay, so thinking about where a lot of archaeology is done. Oops, click. Here we are. That's not very big. Let me try laser pointer. Okay, here we are. So much of our knowledge of the past is in this area: Europe, Near East, Egypt, and a lot in this part of the world. So you can imagine in 1970 or 1960s, when the Penn Museum became interested under Fro Rainey of working all the way over here, that was exotic. That was far away. And some archaeologists, like Chet Gorman, who was the excavator at Ban Chiang, he was attracted to working in a different part of the world. And when I came to Penn as a grad student, I glommed onto that. I was very inspired about working in a very unusual part of the world. And if we go back and we take another look at this map, and again, so much of our knowledge of the human past is centered around this area, and it's a long way to here where Thailand and the Mekong River has been revealing new aspects of how to think about the human past. So the University of Pennsylvania Museum, their first excavation in the 60s was at this site called Shansen. And it's in central Thailand. It's a proto-historic late Iron period site dating to maybe a couple thousand to 1,000 years ago. But the site that gave great renown to Penn's contribution to Southeast Asian archaeology is Ban Chiang, up here in Northeast Thailand. However, you also see a lot of other triangles and circles and axes and things. Penn Museum has done many other excavations besides those first two that I mentioned. There are additional village excavations up in the Northeast near Ban Chiang, some excavations over here. There's the Thailand archaeometallurgy project, which has dug at Pulon here and in this part of central Thailand. So Penn Museum has a very significant contribution to studying the archaeology of Thailand in particular. Now remember, this all was happening in the 60s and 70s, and it was pretty much impossible to work in this time frame in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. And we know why. It was a lot of warfare, conflict, the domino theory. And so Thailand was really the only place in Southeast Asia where one could begin to do modern excavation, modern archaeological research for the first few decades when that kind of work could be done in this part of the world. So big track record. The primary person who brought fame to the University of Pennsylvania Museum was Chet Gorman. And he was hired by Fro Rainey, the director for many, many decades at Penn Museum, then was called University Museum. And he worked with the assigned archaeologist was Pisit Doranwong from the Fine Arts Department. They co-directed excavations at Ban Chiang for 2 years, 1974 and 1975. Now, those excavations weren't a 4-week or 6-week. They were like 6 months, 9 months. They were very long excavations. And so a lot of data were acquired that nowadays would be acquired over many more years. So there's a lot done. Now, here we have some skeletons, but what I want you to see is, so you see that there are some individuals here, and they have grave goods, some pottery, and you can see like a grave cut. And you also see a lot of other holes. Now, if you were an audience in front of me, I would ask you, what do you think those holes were for? And then I would ask, to get some responses, and maybe somebody would come up with, well, they're holes for house posts of buildings. So what we have in a site like Ban Chiang is a mixed mortuary, mixed burial occupation site, mixed burial habitation site. And one of the things I slowly became to appreciate is that in this time period, people were burying bodies under houses or next to houses. And so there was a close relationship between the living and the dead, between life and your ancestors, very close relationship. And that gives a whole kind of new perspective beyond thinking about this as a cemetery, which some archaeologists have said. I think that based on the relationship of the occupation material and the burials, that that people were buried in domains where people were also living, which adds a kind of a new sort of spin on thinking about the society. So another point I want to make again is that I think of archaeology as a social science. In the United States, a lot of archaeology is taught within a four-field program in anthropology. And so we think of it as an anthropological study, not so much as perhaps some European systems would emphasize more of a humanities approach. So, but in the United States, the emphasis tends to be on the social science aspects. And here you can see social science in front of you. You've got a close relationship between the living and the dead, and therefore we hope to find, when we study a society like this, something about what life was like and what was important in those lives and how those lives functioned. So after, when Ban Chiang was dug, you end up with lots of bags, thousands of bags of objects. And basically you're seeing mostly sherds. You have not only the nice pots found in graves, but you also have lots and lots of sherds that were probably discarded during daily life. One of the unusual aspects of the Ban Chiang project is that all of the cultural remains were sent to the University of Pennsylvania Museum. So we have the bags here from the site were sent to Penn Museum, and they were then available for analyzing and in detail. Now, for various reasons, the emphasis for the analysis has focused on the burials and also what archaeologists call small finds, which are what I'm going to talk about, which have been more studied. However, what about me? I was for a couple years in charge of the lab before deciding what I would do my dissertation on. So I spent a lot of time working with volunteers and work study students putting together the pottery from the burials, as you can see here. And after I did that for a couple of years, I decided I wanted to do a different kind of dissertation. I wanted to do something that was more related to people and more directly related to people. And so I came up with an idea, and Chet Gorman somewhat reluctantly went along with it, that I wanted to study plants. I wanted to study how people could have grown plants, could have eaten plants, what kind of plants were available. So this kind of study it's more of an ethnographic approach to looking at a topic. That was coming into vogue at that time. This would have been in the 70s. It's called ethnoarchaeology. So studying ethnography with the purpose of helping to better understand the past, the archaeological past. I went and lived in Ban Chiang village for 20 months. I knew I was going to need at least 18 months because I knew I would need a full seasonal round of plant data. And I'd also, in speaking to ethnographers, heard that and certainly appreciated in the long run that the first 6 months you can just throw out your data. You just don't know what's going on enough to ask meaningful questions, to get informants to give you meaningful answers. And that was the case. For me, it took me a while, even though I took a little intensive Thai, I had to develop the vocabulary specific to talking about plants and agriculture and diet and things like that. That took some time. So I was extremely lucky to have as my immediate next door neighbor a man I called Lung Lee, Uncle Lee. And he was a natural naturalist. He had maybe 4 years of education, but he was just innately fascinated by the natural world around him. So I worked with him throughout that whole time, and he would help me collect plants, select plants that were pertinent to my questions, and we would press them in newspaper with what you put in these little racks here and dry them. And that was the goal of the collection, which was called an ethnobotanical collection, was to provide a reference collection for something called archaeobotany, which we're going to mention in a little bit. So archaeologists try to extract plant remains from their sediments, but how do you identify what you're finding? You need a reference collection. There was no such reference collection for Southeast Asia at the time that I designed this research. So I lived in a house, a little house in Ban Chiang village, and worked with Lung Lee collecting plants, getting data. I had a little registry here, everything got a number. And I systematically worked through the seasonal changes and made observations. So for example, here, this is probably in the summer. This is we see wild rices in the foreground, the very short rice, and then we have cultivated rice in the background. So where did the wild rice grow? That's the kind of thing that I would like to observe. Now, the last 2 months of that work, the museum asked me to make an ethnographic collection of everyday objects. So here you see me looking at a fish trap. I worked again with Lung Lee. By this time we had really formed a partnership. He really understood what I was looking for. I really wanted to have a deep understanding of the traditional way of life in this part of the world and why people did what they did and why they designed fish traps the way they did. What was the exact time of year when this kind of fish trap would be used. I also collected items used to make pottery. There was an active paddle and anvil pottery villages in the region, and I visited them and purchased their tools if they would be willing to sell them to me. I even bought looms, like this loom, this particular loom. And the woman here is weaving a piece of a woman's skirt, right, that she's wearing right here. It's called a foot, a deen. And I purchased that actual loom for the museum. So Chet Gorman passed away in 1981, right at the end of my field work. I was actually on the way home. And he had started an exhibition with the Smithsonian, traveling exhibition about Ban Chiang site. So the museum then asked me to curate that, which I did. And this is another example of kind of pioneering, because it wasn't considered at that time a suitable thing to do an exhibit on a site that hadn't been thoroughly published in a scholarly way first. And I got some pushback on that from some faculty members, but it seemed to me a very important thing to do. If you wait, some decades before you finally publish something to present material to the public, that was not something I thought was a good idea. So I worked on the exhibit, and then the museum asked me to change my dissertation to the Ban Chiang chronology, which I did. The exhibit was a wonderful experience of working with the Smithsonian production team. We have the editor, the fabricator, they did casts, and ultimately that exhibit not only toured 12 cities in the United States and 10 in the United States and Singapore and Bangkok, it was ultimately mounted in Ban Chiang village in a special museum built for it. Since that time, the Thai Fine Arts Department has continued to develop the museum, and it's now a completely modern, first-class, modern, world-class museum all about Ban Chiang, and they've just done a fantastic job. So I've been told by some Thai Fine Arts Department employees that the Ban Chiang exhibit opened their eyes to what an exhibit could be, not just, as I like to say, pots on shelves. So after I finished my dissertation, there was still a lot of work to do. So I set about organizing the lab and recruiting, again, wonderful work study students and volunteers. We continued to put pottery together. You can see all these bags back here. This is a work study student. We hired a work study student photographers, lots of drawing, a huge amount of drawing. There's always a lot of nitty-gritty work to be done for a proper study of an archaeological site. And so that's what I then spent my many years working on. So the majority of the occupation materials, the vast majority of finds would have been sherds from occupations, were returned to Thailand in 1983. The study of reconstructible pottery and small finds continued at Penn. A big focus for a couple of decades, really, has been the study of the metals and objects related to metals. The site of Ban Chiang is famous for its early metallurgy. And my collaborator here is Dr. Elizabeth Hamilton, who is an archaeometallurgist. And she did her dissertation on European archaeometallurgy, but she thankfully joined the Ban Chiang project, and not only has helped us, been instrumental in processing the metal remains, but now has done a lot of IT and database work with us, which is a main thing that we do. And we also have worked a lot with Ardith Anderson, who has been instrumental in the illustration of not only objects and burials, but also sections and plans. And so you have to, teamwork is essential for any kind of archaeological work. So what kinds of finds do we have? So we have a lot of bracelets, basically, or anklets, bangles we call them, and some tools, often socketed. And there's another kind of item called a crucible, which is what the container for holding molten metal. And these kinds of things can be studied not only as objects macroscopically, but there's a lot of technical studies that can tell you a lot about the technology underlying the knowledge base of people at that time. So we worked on that data, very meticulous data collection. And one of the things, in the meantime, more sites are being dug by other people and so forth. One of our observations is that these crucibles for holding the molten metal were actually found very commonly in village sites all over, at least northeast Thailand, and we probably in central Thailand as well. So going back to our society issues, what does this mean about the society? It means they were casting their final products in average villages, not just in a central location run by elites, but it was actually a commonly dispersed technology. So this is a significant contribution to understanding past metal technology and past metal economies, is where were products made? And there's also a lot of evidence that things were very localized. This kind of village liked this kind of bangle. That other kind of village liked a different kind of ads. And so it was very decentralized. And there were also, one of the most important metal finds in terms of quantity were little drippings from the castings. So this is economically quite interesting when we think about a contribution to understanding past technological uses. After that research was well along, we were able to add a new type of study called lead isotope analysis. And that was done by this guy, Ollie Price. And over time, there's a good understanding of where copper and tin resources could be found in, not necessarily by prehistoric peoples, but were just in the ores existed. And as you can see, here we have Ban Chiang, and this part of northeast Thailand is called the Curate Plateau, and it is surrounded by copper and tin resources. This is an incredibly rich area for metal ores. And remember, I mentioned that the Thailand archaeometallurgy project, they excavated in this area, they excavated in Pulon, which is up here, Pulon up here, and as Laos was opening up, there were excavations occurring here, which is a site called Sepon in Laos. So we've got three areas where we know there was prehistoric metal smelting. Couldn't we tie any of our objects to those sites? And in fact, we could. The copper from the Ban Chiang pointed spear point, curved spear point, socketed spear point. So we have Ban Chiang here. Its signature lined up with the Lao mine. And another site dug more recently called Ban Wat, its earliest, in this case, copper, the bronze, the Ban Chiang, the earliest metals are bronze, tin plus copper. Ban Wat, the earliest metals are copper, and its copper came from the central Thailand. So we're starting to see relationships between individual sites and where their copper is coming from. And there are different technological systems and more than one source used at the same time. So all of this detailed work was published in a 4-volume suite published by the Penn Museum, and in excruciating detail. And then there was one summary article where Dr. Hamilton and I, Elizabeth and I, published kind of a synopsis focusing on the economic framework. And we applied a rarely used, I could only find about 4 other archaeologists citing this particular economic principle called Ricardo's Law of Comparative Advantage. And basically that law helps explain this decentralized system that we that the data, when we look at it systematically, suggest occurred. So the excavations at Ban Chiang have contributed, I would consider it some pioneering contributions to the human story. And UNESCO recognized the site as a World Heritage Site in 1992, and they have different criteria, and the criterion chosen for Ban Chiang is that the site bears unique or exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition which has disappeared. What are the key contributions of those monographs? Plus the first one, which is on the skeletons. They debunk conventional 20th century stereotypes for Middle Ages based on Near Eastern and European archaeology. The skeletal study shows that it was a peaceful and very healthy, non-urban Middle Age societies that lived in this area. And that's unusual for what is commonly thought to be a Bronze Age situation where the metals are for warfare. That's not the case we have in Southeast Asia, at least at this time frame. And there's detailed archaeological evidence that show how these societies maintain technically sophisticated, decentralized, but networked communities over 2,000 years. But what was going on in Laos? Museum director Jerry Sabloff asked me to go find out. And when he asked twice, I knew I had to do it. Okay, so 1990s, things are loosening up in this formerly inaccessible countries in Southeast Asia. And of course, while I was living in Ban Chiang and studying Ban Chiang, I would wonder what was going on the other side of the Mekong. Now, while we have this map, I just want to point out that the Mekong is it's the 12th longest river in the world, the longest in Southeast Asia. It's a major river which has seen very little study of its human occupation. So it's an important river in and of itself to study in terms of its human dimension. If we think about some portions of the river, the portion that's in Cambodia and the Delft part, which is in Vietnam, we could call that the lower Mekong. The portion that is up here that's draining from the Himalayan plateau, I consider that the upper Mekong. And the part in the middle, which is most all of Laos and northeast Thailand, this is the middle Mekong, in my view. So my interest is with Ban Chiang and Laos is what is going on in the middle Mekong River in terms of human occupation. Now we go back to this map and just point out that, okay, here we are, Ban Chiang. The work in Laos grew out of the Penn Museum's long work, intensive work in Thailand, done over decades. So in the late 90s, would have been around 1999 or so, or maybe 2000, I reached out to the director of the Heritage Department in Laos. I'd met him at a conference or two, and I asked him how would he feel about a Penn Museum initiated program in Laos. And he said, come and take a look. So in those days, you could only get a visa for 2 weeks. So in December, I went to Vientiane, met the director. He assigned me one of his staff members, Bunhuang Boasasing Pasut. And we did a series of little transects. So this little line here actually should be over here. So I would, at nighttime, look at paper maps in the guest house room, pick out roads that looked to me would go to locations where on this side of the Mekong, I knew sites would occur. And so we did these what were called transects by truck, maybe over about a week, because you have a couple of days of introductions. And so we did these truck transects, and we found sites where I thought they would be, but it was hard going, and it wasn't obvious. And when Hung kept saying to me, "Oh, when we go to Luang Prabang, it'll be totally different, tons of stuff." And so we scheduled 2.5 days upstream Mekong. Here we are, Luang Prabang, where there had been some French work at a couple sites, and actually Tongsa, the director of the Heritage Department, had done his dissertation field work, even if he didn't ever finish. He had dug at a site on this side of the Mekong, and so I knew something was there, and it was actually quite a shock to me, because in those 2.5 days, I saw evidence of 10,000 years of human occupation of this region. This is not an everyday experience for archaeologists. I visited the site that Tongsa had excavated called Tam Hua Pu, obviously a Stone Age site with typical Stone Age tools. Along the Mekong, there were archaeological deposits eroding out of the banks, and I could tell from the sherds that there were thousands of years of evidence there. Some Neolithic type sherds up until the historic period type sherds, stonewares. And virtually every tourist shop had these polished stone adzes for sale. So this was just a remarkable experience. And so I went back to Vientiane and told the director I wanted to develop something for Luang Prabang. And he said, okay. And so I had to come up. You can't raise money and say, we don't know anything about Lao archaeology, please give me $50,000. You have to have hypotheses and theories and be testing something. And so I took a look at the map and I tried to say, well, why would Luang Prabang area be so rich in its evidence? And I observed that there are 3 major tributaries coming in from different parts of northern Laos that would drain, well, for example, the U drains from southern China, and the Sung from northern Vietnam, and the Khan from a place called the Plain of Jars, which is here. And then the Mekong goes west and south. So I thought, okay, we probably have a crossroads situation in this particular location, which is a good reason why it would be so rich. And then there are many other theories about when Lao speakers came in, or when agriculture comes in, when metallurgy comes in. And so this could be a place where you could study many different theories about the movement of peoples and cultures and technologies over a few thousand years. And so that would be a basis upon which to raise some funds. So I went back in 2003 because remember, this is a communist country, and they're not used to people like tramping around in the hinterlands. So I knew I had to get permission. I wanted to propose doing survey along all 3 rivers simultaneously. So that would be 3 separate teams working in fairly remote areas. And I wasn't going to try to raise money on that idea if the government was not going to go along with it. And when I explained why I was doing that, Tongsa said, okay. And so I then raised money from the National Science Foundation and the National Geographic Society to do this survey. And I wanted to implement what at that time was a new technology called mobile GIS. So you're basically making your map not by paper maps and putting a dot on it, but actually getting GIS data live in this case, a PDA, for those of you who remember what a PDA is. So you have your GPS your PDA, and a Bluetooth. And it was quite a trick trying to get all of that data in these 3 separate teams, and then the data would be downloaded every night to create a map of sites. And some of you will recognize Sean Hyla here. This is a grad student I had at the time, Olivia Given, and this is a Thai grad student, I think, Churikamon Onsuan. So we brought 10 people with us to do this. And so we did what was called reconnaissance surveys. So you are basically saying what you're looking for to villagers, and then they take you to potential sites. And so we scaled rugged terrain like this. We took local boats. We found lots of cave sites and open air sites. And after 3 weeks, we had found 58 sites and had a map of their locations. Okay, now we've been doing surveys over the next several years, and we now have more than 100 sites in Luang Prabang province. So this is, again, Luang Prabang city is about here. These are some of the earlier sites. We've expanded on that. We worked further north on the U, and in the future, we want to fill in this gap on the U here. It requires you have to organize boats, access. There are no roads in those particular portions to do an in-depth study of those areas. So that's for the future. So then, starting in 2007, we began test excavating. That means making a small excavation at cave sites on different tributaries. So Pupakau Rock Shelter, Tamong Dalao, Tam Sua, all at intermediate locations, so we could have sort of a common landscape criteria, and then we could compare them. Our last one was Tamanma, and it was the most spectacular one. So it was a great site. Here you can see the team, and here's an overview. We did this gives you an idea of what a test excavation is, a 1 meter by 2 meter square here, a 1 by 1 meter here square. These are teams that have had very little archaeological experience. I mean, they had experience with us, but they hadn't been trained at school or grad school or anything like that. So I wanted to do small studies and train at the same time to develop some kind of skill basis. This site was spectacular for a number of reasons. Now, I've not put in the skeletons that we found, which were very interesting, but this was one of the things we found, this round disc made of a kind of limestone. And underneath the disc was a pit, and the sherds, which put together this quite nice pot. We think that this disc relates to that plain of jars area that I mentioned, and we are redating, or we are suggesting much more recent dates than people have been arguing for in the past. So this is quite an important site, the most important site we have excavated in the program. Now, as I mentioned, we do a lot of other ancillary tasks, a lot of capacity building. As one example, Dr. Catherine Arell from the University of Leeds trained with mobile GIS. We got some nice loose funding in 2008, 2009, and we could use a more sophisticated mobile GIS equipment to do the mapping. We also brought in some specialists like archaeozoologists. And so here you see they bring their own microscopes, their photography setup, mammals of Thailand. And then what's this over here? This is something that we worked on. You have to, archaeozoologists ultimately need a comparative collection of skeletal remains from animals. And this, needless to say, didn't exist in Laos. So we started with a pig. How do you get pig comparative bones? And this is an example of where you see, okay, here's the modern one, and here's your archaeological one. So you can make a comparison and know that you have the right size and the right features. Yes, it's a pig. So how do we get the comparative collection? Well, you go to the pig seller and you pick out a pig that he's willing to sell you. But how do you get the bones? Well, you have to get a butcher to remove the meat, not cutting the bones or messing up your comparative bone samples. Then you have a big party, have the nice meat, and then they boil the bones and dry them, label them so that you have complete sets of all the individual bone elements. And that is the beginning of the Lao comparative zoological collection for archaeozoologists. So there's a lot of fun that we have when we do this kind of thing too. Other specialists included Stephen Oppenheimer came and did DNA sampling from different villages of different ethnic groups. We have a very important paleoclimate study, which you can see here. These were, this is an Australian scholar who worked with an American, and they specialize in studying speleothems, or in this case, stalagmites, that have like rings that look like tree rings, and they can, with all sorts of fancy dating and isotopic work, reconstruct the precipitation as one aspect of paleoclimate. That's been very successful. And some of you heard a few couple months ago, Marie-Claude Boileau, Dr. Marie-Claude Boileau, has come for the last 3 study seasons to work on ceramics. And the last 2 seasons, we've been in an outbuilding in the Royal Palace in Luang Prabang City. This gives you a sense of the palace, and we have been luckily assigned a lovely outbuilding that's not been rehabilitated yet. And this gives you a sense of what that looks like. So we have myself, and this is our current co-director, Surya Munsaiti. And this is our tradeware expert, Naho Shimizu. We had a drawing team over here, Marie-Claude, and our collections manager, Gong Gao. She can find any shirt in any bag that you need. And so it's a nice, comfortable setup. And to give you a sense again of the ceramics, the tradeware could be things like this. Those of you who are tradeware experts who are listening, this is Khmer. We have various Chinese porcelain, and Naho has the knowledge that she can look at one of these and say which kiln in which province in China at what date that was produced. We also found a lot of what we call local stoneware, and this became very interesting as we started noticing the variation in that stoneware. And then there's the majority of sherds are earthenware, which is the primary expertise of Marie-Claude. And you've seen various versions of this picture where she's using the Munsell color chart, making observations. And we can look at the distribution of these different kinds of sherds at the various of the 100 sites that we have been studying in terms of survey, and also the excavated sites. And these parts are still in process. But NAHO has published on the historic tradeware ceramics. And for those of you in the watching, if you see this, you will know, oh, Khmer ceramics. So these are sherds that came all the way down here, got all the way up here. And her dating, based on known types from particular kilns, so she can say, okay, Khmer ceramics were coming into our area in Luang Prabang, 1200 AD, so 800 years ago. And then other ceramics from Vietnam, and other ceramics from Thailand, and other ceramics from China. So we have a whole history here of trade ceramics. And then she can plot on a map, okay, this was the earliest tradeware trade route, and then the Vietnamese coming in, and then the Thai. And so we are getting the, from the historic ceramics, evidence of the crossroads hypothesis that I began with when I said, let's work in Luang Prabang. The earthenwares and stonewares, which are still under investigation, but they are also illuminating these regional connections. So meantime, 2024, just a year ago, I had at the Penn Museum what I call the Year of Botany. And that was based on focusing on Ban Chiang related collections. And the three topics of that year were ethnobotany, archaeobotany, and the ethnographic material culture. We hope ultimately we'll find a scholar willing to do wood identification of charcoal, which is a very important collection that we have here. So remember that ethnobotanical collection I did in Ban Chiang Village, 1978 to 1981? What happened to it? Well, it had been sitting almost untouched in Ban Chiang offices and in labs for the past 40 plus years. What can be done with it? Well, I needed a Thai botanical team. And so I recruited with help from, I didn't recruit, I had a wonderful collaborator in Thailand, a Thai botanist, who recruited for me, Dr. Prachaya Srisanga, who's a taxonomist, and Dr. Warangrat Ngonchu, an ethnobotanist, and two interns from Mahidol University in the plant science department. And we also needed where would those specimens go? They really needed to be in an herbarium, and thankfully, Dr. Chelsea Smith, who is the Philadelphia Herbarium Collections Manager, was enthusiastic to accept this collection once it had been properly curated. So this gives you a sense. I had more than 1,000 specimens. Most of them had to be mounted using special herbarium paper. Dr. Warangrat, whose nickname was, excuse me, Baitoi, made these spectacular labels, which herbarium specimens need, which gives the basic Latin names for the family and the genus and species, and the common name, where exactly it came from, which I had recorded in all my notes. I was the collector. Dr. Prachaya was the person who assigned Latin name, collection date, so forth. So the interns, especially Phi here, was trained in how to do the herbarium specification mounting. So you can see a nice example here. And then by day, Dr. Warangrat could head up the herbarium mounting, and then all of the specimens were step by step sent to the Academy of Natural Sciences and their Philadelphia herbarium, and that's where Lewis and Clark specimens are housed. So I'm very excited that our group will be going there. And they will even have in a cabinet like this, its own special designated cabinet. So I'm very pleased with the outcome here. And all of the data collected will be ultimately uploaded into online databanks. And the one they use is the Mid-Atlantic Herbaria Consortium. So this collection, which could have died, has been rescued for posterity. And what about archaeobotany? Well, in the sub-basement of the Penn Museum, for decades, were these bags of dirt. And I knew what had to be done with them, which is they needed something called flotation. In those bags of dirt were potentially fragments of plants that could tell us something about the ancient life of Ban Chiang people, what they ate, what kind of environment was around them, what they could have used for fuel, in fires, all kinds of things like that. Thankfully, Steve Lang had boxed these bags into nice, neat boxes that you can see here with numbers. And I recruited Dr. Cristina Castillo, who is the best archaeobotanist for mainland Southeast Asia, to come and undertake a flotation program. So this is what that looks like. She trained our two Thai interns, Niall and Phi, in this methodology. You put dirt in a bucket with water and you massage the sediments, trying to release bits of plants which will float to the top. And then the water is carefully poured off into cloth sieves. Those sieves are then tied up, like here. This is Christina tying up. They're called flot. Here you see a bunch of flot drying in their individual bags. They all have a little label. You barely see it, but there's the label here, yellow label right there. Of course, all sorts of records are kept. It was a beautiful time of year when the redbud in the courtyard of the museum was blooming. So it was really a magical time of year. And in the end, you get something like this, little bags of dirt. And they were mailed to Christina in London, and she is studying them to recover and identify what kinds of plants were in these specimens. Now, remember the ethnographic collection the museum asked me to do while I was at Ban Chiang? So this is all pre-computer, so I had handwritten tags like this, and it said the item, and then I had the item in Thai, Dum Bla Khao, fish trap for this kind of fish, Bla Khao Na. So you can see it's a mixture of English and Thai, a little bit of explanation of when the fish trap would be used and in what kind of water. So all of this was shipped back, and the museum, step by step, did paper records like this one. So the Thai is, of course, lost. And the keeper of the collection at that time, her name was Jennifer White, no relation to me. So 12 years after I purchased it, it gets this card. And keepers change, things are stored step by step. And I really wanted to bring a Thai ethnographer. At the same time, I had the Thai botanists to work on the ethnographic collection. And through another Thai archaeologist who I'd worked with, she found me Mew. Mew was perfect. So she came. She'd actually grown up in a village near Ban Chiang, about 30 miles away. She used some of these objects, similar objects, as a child, and certainly saw her family using them. She had a career in the Thai Fine Arts Department in Thai ethnographic museums. So she came and worked closely with Steve Lang, the current keeper of the Asian collection, to really beef up and enhance this collection. So now that trap has a lovely photo, actually several photos. There's lots of comprehensive information. The Thai is back in the description of the location and the name of the object. With the botanists, we filled out more detail on what the plants used to make the object was, and now we have a much richer information about this collection. One of the great fun days we had was putting together the two looms that I bought, and we brought Posai Sidara and Dawi Pantawong, who are proprietors of the NTN Cafe in West Philadelphia, and I've known them many years. And between them, who had used and worked with looms when they lived in Vientiane and in Laos, with you and Bai Doi and Steve and me, we put together the two looms, and you can see that there's no instructions here. This post goes there, and they basically figured it out. And then Steve made this gorgeous digitized illustration of how the loom goes together, because it had to be taken apart and put back in storage. So there's now a good documentation for that loom. So that collection came from about 32 sites in the Ban Chiang area, the same villages from which I collected the plants. And there's now lots of content online about this collection. So the future. We just signed a new 4-year MOU with the Lao government to continue the MMAP work. In Laos, I'm anticipating field and study seasons to include more post-excavation analyses, survey, a test excavation in the U drainage system, where we haven't had an excavation yet. We are migrating, with the help of Dr. Hamilton and other collaborators, our data system to a cloud-based system. And we want to train Lao, Thai, and ourselves and Westerners in this new cloud-based data management system. Of course, publication, and more publication of both Ban Chiang data and MMAP data from Laos. And we're also in the process of initiating a Center for Archaeology in Luang Prabang. Now, thank yous can't begin to list all of the incredible people who have and institutions who have helped us over the years, but this just gives you a snapshot, along with a nice view of the Mekong in the Luang Prabang area. And thank you very much for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you. If anyone have any questions for Joyce, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll ask them as they come up. That's amazing. I was just about, Joyce, how could people support you in your work?
What a wonderful question. We have kind of a PayPal type way of making easy online donations. And if you want to donate in a different way, anything from checks to RMDs or whatever, you should contact me. I'm easily found, and I can discuss with you what kind of donation you would like to make, and we can come up with the best approach that fits your preferences.
Excellent. Thank you. Kurt is saying you gave a great talk and you are a pioneer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie's asking, thank you. What was your biggest surprise along the way?
Oh gosh. The biggest, let's see, the biggest surprise, I would have to say, I didn't show because it has skeletons in it, a burial at Taman Ma. And actually there were numerous people involved, and there was a pot that had the remains of 3 individuals, and there were 2 skulls looking up through the opening of the pot. That was a real surprise. I would say that was my biggest surprise. I've never seen that elsewhere in Southeast Asia, and so it was unanticipated.
Okay, are there any, did Joyce answer everyone's questions? Oh, hold on, one came in the Q&A. Sorry if I missed it. What was the date range for Thailand Bronze Age?
Okay, yeah, I don't emphasize that because it's debated. So for bronze, the conservative end is late second millennium BC or late second millennium BCE. In other words, the late conservative end is like 1100 BC, and lasting again to like 8 or 500 BC. So, but I'm the kind of the more broader view, and I see it as early second millennium BC, somewhere around 1800 BC, and lasting to about 800 BC when I think iron comes in. All these things are highly debated, and they work themselves out over time when more data become available.
Thank you. All of the trade and interaction, but no one seems to be fighting over the trade routes. Is there any evidence of that?
A great question. So this is a peaceful Bronze Age. I like to call it the peaceful Bronze Age. They are not fighting. They are this is where that principle I mentioned, Ricardo's law of comparative advantage, comes in. It is a sort of a comprehensive way of looking at development of regional systems where different communities buy into the system by having an economic role. So you find a lot of specialization where one village might specialize in making this kind of ads, and another village might specialize in stone adzes, and the evidence for that is becoming clearer and clearer. And it goes way back. It goes back from the beginning, the earliest, probably even pre-agricultural time frames. So having a very long tradition of community exchange and local specialization seems to have fostered a relatively peaceful trajectory up until kind of late Iron Age, when there's some more significant there's one site in Cambodia where it really is violent. They really have damage to skulls. They're from fighting. They have armor of some sort. But up until that time, it's very, when you look at human skeletons, when they look at like breakages and different kinds of damage, the damage comes out to, according to the specialists, it's everyday falls, that kind of accidental types of damage. There's no skeletal evidence for warfare until quite late.
Thank you. Is any of your funding coming from the U.S. government?
That's a excellent question. So I had the NSF funds from for the first survey in 2005, but the kind of work that I do in this part of the world, it's not really very conducive to U.S. government support. I have tried to. There's a particular fund that I've tried to interest. There's something called the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation, and we're just not a good match for that. So it's because it's at this very early stage of work. Government, and this is pre-Trump, NSFs were more suited for pretty well-established projects, and not that well suited for pioneering work, which is the kind of thing I like to do.
So Fred is saying a great chance for collaboration.
Mhm.
Peggy wants to know, can you tell us something about the antiquity of rice agriculture in Ban Chiang?
So, rice ag, we actually have, in my view, a good solid date on that. One of our earliest burials had rice remains in its burial pot, and we got a date from them, and 2100 BC or BCE if you prefer that. So that's not the earliest in Southeast Asia now, because it's, well, actually that's not true. Um, it is definitely an early evidence for rice, probably agriculture of some sort, at that time frame. We're getting a little bit earlier dates from other sites for millet, a little bit like 2300, 2400 BC, so a little bit older. And this whole topic of when did rice agriculture come in? What did it look like? Was it wet rice? Was it dry rice? This is a very dynamic area for investigation. And the archaeobotanist I mentioned, Christina Castillo, has been doing work on this in a very innovative way. How do you figure out wet rice from dry rice, for example? Because it's a different cropping system and has different implications for social organization. She's looking at weed seeds. So wet rice grown in paddies is going to have a different kind of weed associated with it than dry rice grown in dry fields. And so she has her evidence from numbers, she looks at many sites, is that at this time it probably would have been dry rice, rice grown in dry fields, not wet rice. And that comes in at a certain point, and like maybe around, I'm guessing here, my memory isn't perfect, but no earlier than 200 BC. So so we need to envision kind of a agrarian society that is quite different than the rice agricultural society we see in the area today, which is very wet paddy. It was probably also very diverse, lots of different plants, lots of hunting and gathering coexisting with agriculture. So that's one of the things that I think that some of my ethnobotanical work contributes to fleshing out the other parts of the diet that could have been there besides rice.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Joyce, so much for sharing your work with us.
Thanks, Tina, for inviting me.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We'll be back in the fall, so I want to have a great summer. Please stop by and visit the Penn Museum if you can. During the summer, we do have some great activities happening, and Wednesdays in July, we have live music out in the courtyard, rain or shine. And we hope to see you this summer. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.